Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. This is a very, very big day when it comes to the Israel-Hamas war. And we are going to talk about what has happened during this day, what has happened with regards to the hostages, what has happened with regards to Palestinian prisoners, the bodies of hostages that remain in captivity in Gaza, and if Israel has returned the bodies of Palestinians that it is holding and how many are left. What does this mean for the deal? We're also going to talk about other political events that happened during this day that also relates to the visit of US President Trump to Israel, but more importantly, the peace conference, the conference that happened in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. What happened in that conference? Who attended? The importance of the identities of those who attended. What does this mean for the war? Is the war over? What now is happening in the Gaza Strip on the ground? All those things I'm going to try to cover. And obviously, as always, I am here to take questions. Those of you who are seeing me for the first time, my name is Alon Burstein. I'm a professor of political science and Israel Institute fellow at Tufts University. I'm going to give it a few more minutes to allow more people to join. One thing I'm going to say, those of you who are not watching live necessarily, but are seeing the recording, thank you everyone who has left comments and messages about the fact that you'd like to see more live events. I am sorry that I don't actually publicize as much in advance when there's going to be a live event. Full disclosure, I have two little kids at home. One of them is 3, one of them is 11 months, and my ability to plan ahead always when exactly I'm going to have time to go live is very limited. And thus, first of all, if I appear tired, that is the reason. And second of all, that is sometimes why I decide to go on live very shortly before I go on. I'm going to try to plan more of these events up front and try to publicize them. But again, that is the reason why I cannot actually plan them so far in advance. So those of you who are here now, feel free to write hi into the chat. Tell me where you're from, just so I know who's actually connected. And broadly, very slowly, going to start to talk about what has happened. What has happened over the last day? Why is it such a monumental day? And why, despite a lot of declarations, I am still hesitant to say the war is over. It's been declared officially over, but there are so many question marks with regards to what happens next and the forces on the ground, and especially what's happening in the Gaza Strip, which not a lot of people, I feel, are paying enough attention to, that may end up leading us back, maybe not to full-blown violence, but away from the prosperity that has been envisioned for the end of the war. So, thank you. First person writing in, coming in from Australia. P-Lub46, thank you. Anyone else feel like writing where they're from, or if you have any questions or things that you'd like me to focus on, again, feel free to write that into the chat. So, what has happened over the last day? Just a recap of the last several days and how we got to what happened on October 13th. A ceasefire, an indefinite truce, has been declared between the sides as of the morning 1:20 a.m. local time on October 9th. What happened there is that the sides got together and agreed on a framework, an implementation framework of the first phase of Trump's 20-point plan, the plan to end the war in Gaza. Anyone who's been following what I've been talking about has heard me say many times that Trump's 20-point plan should not be thought of as a plan. It should really be thought of more as a framework. It should be thought of as a framework from Pennsylvania. Hello. Should be thought of more as a framework, a general idea as to what should be implemented in the Gaza Strip long term, not necessarily a day-to-day plan. So each time there's an attempt to then implement part of it, you need the sides to actually get together and sit down and figure out, okay, what's going to happen on the ground? That happened at the beginning throughout last week, where the sides got together and managed to figure out how to implement the first part of the 20-point plan, which focused on the release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, point number 1, a truce and a ceasefire between the sides, point number 2, the monumental entry of humanitarian aid and heavy equipment into the Gaza Strip, point number 3, and the redeployment of the Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli military, the IDF, in the Gaza Strip as part of a gradual plan of withdrawal, point number 4. Those 4 points, release of hostages, entrance of humanitarian aid, a truce, and the Israeli military withdrawing, have all been part of what was decided to be implemented since Friday. The deadline for that was today at 12 noon local time, What was supposed to happen until then, the Israeli military was going to withdraw back to roughly 58% of the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military now holds all the areas between this line and Israel, going down here, but it actually, and Rafah, but it actually does not control half of Han Yunis, the entire areas of the central parts of the Gaza Strip, and most of the areas of Gaza City are now not in its control. We'll talk about that in a minute. The Israeli military completed its withdrawal on Friday, and then we had a 72-hour clock in which Hamas was supposed to return. The 20-point plan says it is going to return all of the hostages, the living and dead hostages, are all going to be returned in exchange for a set amount of Palestinian prisoners. Now, already during the negotiations, Hamas said that it does not know the whereabouts of the remains of between 8 to 10 hostages. It was some said 8, some said 10, possibly the Palestinian Islamic Jihad was the other two. So Hamas said already it can return the 20 live hostages, but as far as the bodies of hostages, it cannot return them all, and a mechanism was decided to figure out how they're going to search for them in the Gaza Strip. So all that was planned out. What happened today is we did have that hostage exchange. 20 live hostages, the last Israeli hostages that have been held in the Gaza Strip for 2 years, almost to the day, have been held in captivity in the Gaza Strip, were in fact released. There's no more live hostages held in the Gaza Strip. So that's one of the big moments in the war when it comes to the war aims, Israel's legitimacy for the war, why Israel went to war, Hamas, and the fact that it was holding hostages. There's no more live hostages in the Gaza Strip. In exchange, Israel released close to 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. Some of these were released, most of them to the Gaza Strip. The prisoners that are considered the more serious prisoners, the ones that are sentenced to life in Israeli jails, a lot of them were deported, some of them released to the West Bank, some to the Gaza Strip, and other prisoners have been released to East Jerusalem. That's in terms of the live hostages that were released and the Palestinian prisoners. Later in the day, however, when Hamas was supposed to release or give back the remains of the hostages that it has in its possessions, the bodies of hostages, in exchange for the bodies of Palestinians, Hamas suddenly announced that it can only give back 4 bodies. There are 24. There were 28 bodies that were held in the Gaza Strip, and Hamas can only give back 4 bodies. This caused a lot of criticism within Israel because it is considered, according to the agreement, a major violation on Hamas's part of the deal, on the one hand. On the other hand, Hamas did say that it does not know the location of all the bodies, so technically it already said that it won't be able to return all the bodies, and there was conversation within Israel, is this considered a violation of the deal and has the deal effectively broken down or not? As for now, despite Hamas's violation, 4 of the bodies were returned. They're currently being inspected in Israel, and once it is confirmed that they in fact do belong to 4 hostages, then Israel is going to release the bodies of upwards of roughly 20 or 30 Palestinians that it holds. But there's no real mechanism in place for what happens next. The implementation plan said that all of the hostages, living and dead, will be returned. Hamas said it cannot return them all, and there will be some mechanism for looking for the bodies, but no one really actually thought or put into writing what happens if Hamas holds on to the bodies. Is there going to be a new negotiation over the bodies of hostages now? Is Hamas holding on to them as collateral for the Israeli military to continue its withdrawal from the Gaza Strip? Is it possible that Hamas actually does not know the location of most of the bodies and now they're going to be searched for? At this point, that is not clear. Someone else coming in from Paris, Tennessee. Thank you. Again, those of you who have joined now, feel free to write in where you're from. If you have any questions or you want me to focus on something specific, also feel free to write that in. So in terms of hostages, all living hostages have been released. Currently in the Gaza Strip, as of now, there are still bodies of 24 hostages, and it is unknown how many of them Hamas knows their location and is just not returning them as part of, once again, possibly bargaining, possibly holding them for later use, or maybe their location, in fact, is not known. The majority of the Gaza Strip has been reduced to rubble when it comes to the Israeli military's bombing, so it is also possible that their location at this point, or possibly long-term, will not be known. That's in terms of the hostages. The other facets of the deal that so far have been implemented, there has been a monumental increase in the amount of humanitarian aid that is coming into the Gaza Strip. Upwards of 600 aid trucks are coming in. The aid is being distributed by the United Nations. That's an important facet. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, it has not been reported if it's still active or if they're dismantling it at this point, but the aid trucks are delivering aid through the United Nations. According to reports, it's coming to all areas of the Gaza Strip. So the amount of food, water, medical supplies is actually increasing in Gaza. Not nearly enough, according to aid agencies, compared to what is needed, but it is increasing. And that is as far as aid is concerned. In addition to that, an important facet is there's been the entrance of heavy industrial equipment, tractors, bulldozers, in order to start clearing the rubble. Like I said, most of the cities in the Gaza Strip are reduced to rubble. It is impossible for the municipalities to even set up tents or figure out where to house people. So that also has been happening. We've seen the entrance of tractors and bulldozers from Egypt. Another facet that is supposed to happen tomorrow, although again, Israel may not allow it now, contingent on the return of bodies, is the opening of the Rafah crossing. The crossing between Gaza and Egypt also was supposed to be opened and so far has not. So that's in terms of what has happened so far with regards to the implementation of the deal. Then what happened now? What happened today on the realm of politics? So U.S. President Trump made his visit first to Israel. He came to the Middle East. First to Israel, was given a hero's welcome there, and went to speak in the Israeli parliament in the Knesset. I see a lot of people just joined now. So again, I'm going to say we're talking about the events of the day coming in from Israel and the Gaza Strip and the peace conference in Egypt. If you're interested, if you have any questions, feel free to tell me what you'd like me to focus on. Otherwise, I'm going to continue talking about the politics, Trump, and what was announced. And I'm really going to talk about the identities of the people that attended the conference in Egypt, because that is very important, who attended, who was not invited, and also what is happening on the ground in the Gaza Strip. So Trump arrived in Israel, given a hero's welcome. Every politician in Israel lined up to tell Trump that he is the hero of the Jewish people, the release of hostages, etc. And then, perhaps we hear Italian, thank you. So then Trump went to speak in the Israeli parliament. He spoke in the Israeli parliament. His speech lasted for over an hour. It included lots of different things. He heaped praises upon the Israeli military and security establishment. He boasted about the cooperation between Israel and the United States during the war with Iran. He talked about Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and their monumental roles in ending wars, talked a lot about ending wars in Ukraine. In very, very, I'll say, Trump style, spoke a lot about himself and how he was seen as a bully who's going to come and fight with everyone, but in fact, he's ending wars and wants to see himself as a messenger of peace. He also talked about ending wars in the entire Middle East and having prosperity in the Middle East, and everyone's going to love each other. So boasted a lot about that, heaped praises on Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu again and again in a moment that was heavily analyzed in Israeli politics. Trump also talked about how the Israeli president should pardon Netanyahu. Netanyahu is on trial for charges of bribery, breach of trust, and corruption. Trump said he should be pardoned and that Israel shouldn't be messing with this, etc., etc. With regards to the war, the important parts that can be taken out from Trump's speech in Israel's parliament, the Knesset, before I'll get to what happened in Egypt, is that he repeatedly stated that the war is over. It's important to remember that within Israel, within the coalition formation and establishment of Prime Minister Netanyahu, right now in the coalition officially is the Likud party, Netanyahu's party, and only two other parties, Religious Zionism and Jewish Power. Both of them have said that if the war ends without Israel defeating, wiping out Hamas, and possibly annexing Gaza, they're going to tear the government down. And Netanyahu has been boasting again and again that the war is not over, the fighting's not over, that everything is contingent on what happens next, demilitarizing, disarming Hamas, etc. Trump made very clear that as far as he's concerned, the war is over. He explicitly said Israel has achieved all it can achieve through military strength. He said again and again that he hopes that there will be peace between Israel and Palestinians. He's not talking about a Palestinian state, but he hoped that there will be peace between Israel and Palestinians. He also said that Iran is not trying to develop nuclear weapons anymore, something that Israel has said, that the fight with Iran is going to continue and that Iran is trying to restore its uranium enrichment project. Trump said, actually, we've defeated Iran. They don't want nuclear weapons anymore, and maybe there'll be peace with Iran also. So all kinds of things that on the one hand, he was heaping praises on Israel, its security establishment, and Netanyahu. At the same time, he was also adamantly repeating and blowing holes through the narrative within Israel that very possibly there will be return to fighting in the Gaza Strip, that there might be a return to fighting with Iran. Trump said and made clear that he didn't, I'll say it differently. He did not say explicitly, but he made clear through his different rhetoric that he is not going to support an Israeli expansion of the war in Gaza, and that he's not going to support a military intervention with Iran. So those types of things are part of what Trump spoke about. Becca joined only 15 minutes late. Hi and welcome. Again, anyone else who has just joined, we are talking about the politics events of the day when it comes to the Gaza Strip. Feel free to write into the chat if you have any questions or want me to focus on something specific. So that was Trump talking about the war in Israel. His visit to Israel is the shortest visit of a U.S. president in Israel's history. He came for, I think, a grand total of 5 hours, and then left to the peace conference in Egypt. That's what I'm going to talk about next, because that was really one of the more interesting developments of the day. The peace conference in Egypt was organized in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is where there's often peace conferences, and it was convened by the United States, U.S. President Trump, and the president of Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Very importantly, the list of people who were invited to the conference is endless. Leaders of countries throughout the entire Middle East and leaders of countries throughout Europe and the world. All were invited, and a lot of them attended this conference. I am actually going to read out the list just to give a sense of the amount of leaders and countries that were invited. So in addition to the United States and Egypt, we had prime ministers from Australia, Armenia, the president of Azerbaijan, the king of Bahrain, the prime minister of Canada, the leaders of Cyprus, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, the foreign minister of India, president of Indonesia, prime minister of Iraq, prime minister of Italy, the ambassador from Japan, the king of Jordan, prime minister of Kuwait, the leaders from Norway, Oman, Pakistan, the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, was invited and was there shaking hands with Trump. In addition, the Emir of Qatar, leaders of Spain, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And in addition to that, the Secretary General of the United Nations, the leader of the European Union, and the Secretary General of the Arab League. The conference was attended by all of the important leaders within the regional of the Middle East, within Europe, and by the international bodies. Glaringly missing from that are the fighting sides. Israel and Hamas were not part of this conference. They were actually not invited to take part in this conference. Now, Hamas not being invited is very understandable. Hamas is designated as a terror group by Israel, the United States, the EU, and the United Nations. According to the peace plan, Hamas is to be demilitarized, disarmed, and not take part in the administration. So there is a lot of merit and logic to Hamas not being invited. Israel not being invited was something that was glaring to most. At first, it was just assumed that Trump didn't want Israel to come because, much like he organized this plan, the 20-point plan, and sold it to the Arab and Muslim world, and then only gave it to Israel, he wants to be the one leading the show and doesn't want actually to have countries either boycotting Israel or to have input from the fighting sides. He wants sort of the negotiating countries to come and dictate terms and say, this is what is happening, this is what you're going to do from now on. A little bit resembling those of you who saw me analyze the phone call between Netanyahu and the Prime Minister of Qatar when Trump said, you are now doing what I'm telling you to do. And Trump actually gave Netanyahu a piece of paper and said, call the Prime Minister of Qatar and read this out. So similarly, it seemed like Trump wanted that to be the case. Throughout the day, however, there were some interesting developments on that front. When Trump arrived in Israel, he, again, with Netanyahu, made a phone call to the Egyptian president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Sisi and Netanyahu have not spoken in 2 years. They had not spoken since the war broke out. But Trump organized this phone call, and all of a sudden, Israel was invited. All of a sudden, there started to be all of these comments that Israel is going to join the peace conference. Then rumors started to be spread within Israel about the fact that Netanyahu does not want to go. And there were 2 different reasons or 3 different reasons that were given. One of these was that Netanyahu was worried of the optics because he's going to stand there with the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, possibly forced to shake hands with him by Trump, when in fact Netanyahu has said that the Palestinian Authority is Israel's enemy. He in the past have said that they're a worse enemy than Hamas. So in that sense, Netanyahu was worried about that. There were also a lot of rumors that he was concerned for the cohesiveness of his coalition for a lot of different reasons. One is it's a Jewish holiday, so the Prime Minister of Israel is not supposed to violate that. It's a Jewish holiday on Monday night, Tuesday. Another is the pressures from his right-wing coalition. Throughout the day, there were all these rumors, and then it was all of a sudden announced that Netanyahu actually is canceling his participation and is not going to participate. Everyone assumed, once again, that this is because of the pressures from within Israel. Then, a little bit later, Reuters and also different news outlets in Turkey started to publish that someone's just writing that the rumor about Erdogan, about the president of Turkey, exactly that. Erdogan, who has now become a much more important facet or factor in the negotiations. Until now, Turkey was not part of it. It was always Egypt and Qatar. But Trump really bought Turkey in the last week and has given Erdogan really a position of power and of respect in the negotiations. According to reports, when Erdogan heard that Netanyahu is going to be joining, he went for nuclear. He announced that if Netanyahu joins, he is going to back out of the conference. There were even reports that his plane was on its way to Sharm el-Sheikh and started to turn around and leave. And then immediately it was announced that Netanyahu actually will not be coming. So to be perfectly honest, I do not know which of these different options is the actual one, is the actual truth about why Israel decided to not attend in the end. Very likely it's a combination of those things. Very likely Turkey really did threaten that they would pull out if Israel attended. And at the same time, it was politically convenient for Netanyahu to pull out. However, alongside all that quote-unquote convenience for Israel not participating, the fact that Israel or Hamas, again, did not participate in this conference really shines a light, some would say a red light, some would say a good light, on the prospects of this actually leading to the enduring ceasefire and peace between Israel and, I'll just say Palestinians, Hamas Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Because at the end of the day, all the sides today declared in the peace conference in Sharm el-Sheikh that the war is over. They declared the war is over. Trump said that they're talking about the next steps that are going to be implemented, which I'll talk about in a minute. But those steps need to be implemented by Israel and Hamas. Now, Israel at this point is entirely dependent on the United States. Israel and the UN Security Council now usually has 14 votes against it, no matter what the subject is. And the United States keeps on vetoing. Israel is having more and more trade difficulties with countries within Europe as a result of the war. So it's becoming more and more contingent on and dependent on the United States. So Israel possibly could be compelled by Trump to just agree. Maybe Hamas also could be compelled by Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt. But it is sort of glaring, the fact that the peace is being declared, or at least a ceasefire and end to the war is being declared between the sides, without the actual sides there. Again, maybe that's a good thing, because Israel and Hamas is one thing that they've proven over the last 2 years is that, one, they're not actually going to destroy each other militarily, and two, they're not actually good at making peace with each other. So maybe it's a good thing in terms of ending the war. But at the same time, it also raises a lot of question marks with regards to the actual implementation on the ground and the sides agreeing to this. See other people writing where they're coming in from, so taking a little break. People coming in from Malden on Hudson, New York, from Texas. Thank you again. Feel free, write in where you're from. And if you have any questions, if you want me to focus on something specific, feel free. I'm going to talk now soon. I'm going to pause for a moment to take a drink, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what those next steps are supposed to be. And then I'm going to look at what is actually happening on the ground in the Gaza Strip and how do we understand this with regards to those next steps. So again, I'm taking a pause. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in. I'm happy to field them as well. If any of my students are laughing or are watching, they're probably laughing because they know also when I'm giving lectures, I pause for drinking very often. So I hope I'm giving them a good laugh. I'm from Miami, from the west coast of Canada. I've never been to the west coast of Canada. Fran, where on the west coast? I've never been to the west coast of Canada. I lived in Montreal for 2 years. I love Canada, but Montreal and Toronto is mostly where I spent my time. So, still waiting to get out to the west coast. So, what was agreed upon at this conference? Thank you. People suggesting Vancouver. I won't go there. People suggesting that I should hydrate. Thank you. I know I should. Is the Shark meeting still going on? Technically, the conference is over. A lot of the leaders probably did remain because it is very rare to have a conference this size. So it is very, very likely that we're going to see some of the leaders remaining, also to discuss issues among themselves, trade agreements, and etc. But officially, the conference is over. So, what actually happened? I'll start from saying we don't know. They didn't actually publish what was decided, but a document was signed by the negotiating countries, but more importantly, the countries that do not actually look at themselves as negotiators. At this point, they're considering themselves the guarantors of the deal. What was signed was a document signed by the United States under Trump, Qatar under the Emir of Qatar, Tamimi, Egypt under President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and Turkey under President Erdogan. They signed a document, not as the mediators, but as the guarantors of the deal. So they are supposed to guarantee that the sides live up to the agreement. The United States, obviously, Israel, and the other countries, Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt, obviously on Hamas. So that's all that was published, that they signed the agreement for an end to the war and that they're going to guarantee the implementation of the next steps. What are those next steps? With regards to the 20-point plan, what was supposed to happen, again, after the release of all the hostages and the return also the remains of hostages. So it's unclear if that's going to happen right now, considering that 24 bodies of hostages remain in the Gaza Strip. However, the next steps that are supposed to happen are, on the one hand, a disarming of Hamas. Hamas is supposed to give up its weaponry. Demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, which is different than disarming. That means also removing and destroying the attack tunnels in Gaza, destroying the plans for manufacturing weapons in the Gaza Strip. So demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. In parallel, there's supposed to be the establishment of what's called an international transitory force that, again, according to Trump's plan, is supposed to be made up of the different Arab states and possible participation of the United States also, that is supposed to then take control of territory that the Israeli military will withdraw from. So the Israeli military, once again, just as a reminder, controls now about 60% of the Gaza Strip, all the areas from where I'm pointing to Israel. So all these areas here towards Israel, all these areas here towards Israel, all these areas here. Then it's actually pulled back from Han Yunis quite a lot, but it still controls all of Rafah over here. So about 60% of the Gaza Strip is still under control of the Israeli military. According to the plan, there's supposed to be the creation of this international force that then will assume control over territory. It says explicitly territory that is terror-free, free of terrorism. And then Israel will pull back, and this force is also going to take control and also going to train Palestinian police officers that will be vetted. Like I said, though, that's a framework. The plan does not say at what point do you decide that the area is terror-free. At what point, who decides that? Israel? Hamas? Palestinian Authority? Who decides that? That is unclear. It's unclear what's going to be the makeup of this international transitory force. Does Israel get to decide? Can Saudi Arabia, Qatar, can they send soldiers to the Gaza Strip? What is the relationship between this force and Israel? All this is not decided. That's why I said this is all a framework. What needs to be decided now, theoretically, is how is this next phase implemented? The gradual withdrawal of the Israeli military in parallel to Hamas disarming and the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. And then, likely, this is considered a future phase, establishing a technocratic government in Gaza that is not made up of Hamas, that is made up of independent Palestinian representatives. That's also supposed to happen. So, Trump said today that there's already negotiations happening on the implementation of this next phase. So, theoretically, this conference was supposed to be the launching of those negotiations. They did not decide anything in this conference, but those negotiations are theoretically underway. Once again, though, Israel was not part of the conference. These negotiations are going to have to involve Israel somehow. They're going to have to involve Hamas somehow, but those two were not part of the conference. So, with regards to the question of what happens next, quite honestly, we don't know. And it is not clear if the sides on the ground, Israel and Hamas, know. Theoretically, now the next phase of implementing the plan is going to be negotiated. Israel and Hamas will have to be involved, but the plan also gives no contingency to, and what happens if they don't agree? What happens if Hamas, like I said, does not return the rest of the bodies of hostages, or if Israel refuses to withdraw? The plan doesn't actually discuss that. So all that is that's what happened today in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. We had the declaration of the end of the war. We had Trump saying that there's negotiations on implementing the second phase. We had the countries that are supposed to guarantee the implementation of the peace plan actually signing that they will guarantee that, but nothing concrete with regards to what is going to be the next phases of the war. So that's the current political situation, that everyone's waiting, but there's no clear trajectory on what is the actual next phase. Pausing here for a minute to look at some of the comments, see if there's any questions. People are writing where they're from, and they're arguing about what is the best parts. The best part of Canada is Vancouver. Again, I've heard that, but I honestly have never been there, so I can't really comment on that yet. Someone asks, is there any speculation as to why Indonesia's leader backtracked on the rumored visit to Jerusalem? Was it Erdogan? So I will say that yes, the president of Indonesia has made a lot of, I'll say, overtures and signals that he wants to develop a relationship with Israel. It was very surprising that when he spoke at the United Nations a few weeks ago, he explicitly said that there will be no pathway towards a Palestinian state without guaranteeing Israel's security first, that only if Israel feels secure can you actually achieve a Palestinian state, and that is a rare statement from a leader of a Muslim country. And then there were rumors that he was going to come visit Israel on Wednesday. As was accurately said in the question, that he all of a sudden backed out from that. There is no speculation that's been published about why. What you suggested here, was it Erdogan? I do assume that it was pressures from the different sides, not necessarily Turkey. It may have been pressures from the Palestinian Authority. It may have been pressures from the Arab League. But it was pressures to say, don't give Israel the quote-unquote bonus of recognition from the largest Muslim country in the world, Indonesia, until we see further implementation. Like I said, right now it's unclear. Is Israel supposed to withdraw from the Gaza Strip in the next week or in 6 months? It's unclear. And I imagine that the president of Indonesia came under a lot of pressure to not give Israel the reward for actually moving forward with ending the war while things are still left up in the air. But like I said, that's a total guess on my part. Other questions. I know this is an impossible question to answer, always a good way to start. But what do you think Netanyahu's political future might look like going forward now this deal has been struck? So I indeed try not to speculate about what is going to happen in the future. I will say that there have been at least 4 times in the last 10 to 15 years that it has looked like Netanyahu is through. It has looked like he's not coming back to the scene. He's been defeated politically. And I always say about Netanyahu, love him or hate him, he is a political genius. Love him or hate him, he's a political wizard. He manages to always come back. When 2 years ago at this point, October 13th of 2023, Netanyahu's polls showed that he would get about 13 seats. It showed that his party was crashing, obviously right after the October 7th attack, and it showed that he was one of the most mistrusted leaders in Israel. Now he's polling as the biggest party. So he has managed to hold on to power. So at this point, I really can't actually speculate, because it would seem like it would be very hard for him to sell that Israel has won the war like he wanted to, because I'm going to talk about what's happening on the ground in a minute. But Netanyahu manages to sell things every time. So honestly, very hard to say. Other questions? Becca says, I am skeptical of all phase 2. I'm sorry to be a downer. Yes, I'm also skeptical that it's all going to be implemented on the one hand. On the other hand, go back a month and say, well, a month ago, on September 13th, we were 4 days after Israel's attempted assassination of the Hamas leadership in Qatar. Say that within a month, we're going to have the release of all living hostages and a regional peace plan. That seemed very unlikely. I'll give you more than that. Go back 8 months. Go back 8 months to that conference between Netanyahu and Trump in February, where they declared that there's going to be the complete ethnic cleansing of all Palestinians from Gaza. It's going to be the Riviera of the Middle East. The United States is going to own it. It's going to take it over. We're going to have Trump Towers. We're going to have all these things. Imagine that, 8 months later, we're going to have a regional conference attended by the vast majority of the Arab world and the Muslim world signing on to a peace plan that is led by Trump. So I am also skeptical that this is actually going to be implemented the way the peace plan says. At the same time, strange things are happening. Strange things are happening, and it is very difficult to predict the trajectory that the war is going to go. Other things, I'm just looking at the comments before I even talk a little bit about what's happening on the ground. In my opinion, after today, is there a chance for true peace? Hamas is regaining control on the ground, and the Palestinian Authority does not seem to want to reform. Abbas is still wearing a key symbol of the return. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening on the ground in a minute. I do say that I caution against the over-analyzing of Abbas's symbols. Very often it was talked about Arafat and the kafia, Mahmoud Abbas and the key symbol. These things are culturally significant throughout Palestinian history. They do not always mean their original meaning. In the same way as members of Israel's cabinet have often worn different symbols or used different languages that have related to things in Israel's history, and usually it was taken as, okay, but they're using that in a certain way. In the same way as, again, the United States president often talks about different things, it doesn't mean actually, whether even despite the symbolism of it, it doesn't mean that this is actually what they're aspiring to. Often these things have cultural significance. I'm not defending the use of this symbol or that symbol. I am saying what matters is what actually happens on the ground. And very often it's important to remember, just like Netanyahu has to use rhetoric to appease the political forces in Israel, and Trump has to use rhetoric to appease the political forces in the United States. Trump, whenever he proposes one of these developments, he always goes on and on about how the United States is not going to pay for anything, and it's all going to be the regional actors. Now, that isn't something that you should be selling to the local population. I want you to do this, but I'm not going to pay for it. But we understand that Trump needs to talk to his local supporters, MAGA, the Republican Party. They don't want a lot of spending internationally. So he says that whether it's true or not true, the United States usually does end up paying. It usually does end up paying a lot. Right before the government shutdown, it was rumored the United States transferred several $100 billion to the Lebanese military in order to continue to implement the disarming of Hezbollah. The United States does pay, but Trump says, but we're not going to. Similarly, if Abbas is wearing a symbol that has a key, yes, that is very associated to the return of 1948 and the return of all Palestinians to Israel, maybe even the fact that Israel won't exist, but it's also geared towards internal politics. It's geared towards that, not necessarily meaning exactly what we think it might mean. Becca says, Israel says it won't withdraw. Hamas says weapons. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, about what the sides are talking about and what's happening on the ground. Is Hamas coming back to power? Again, I'm going to talk about all this, so maybe I'm actually going to stop looking at the questions for a second and talk a little bit about what's happening on the ground in the Gaza Strip. The moment that a ceasefire was declared, there was a question. Hamas said that it's willing to give up its governing powers in Gaza long term. But it's also important to remember that there is no other governing structure. There's no one else that has political institutions. There's no one else that has the levels of infrastructure that Hamas has, even if a lot of it was destroyed and a lot of people were killed. And so it's not surprising that, wouldn't you know, the moment a truce was declared, in the exact same hour, not coincidentally, the exact same hour, exact same time that Israel announced that it has completed its withdrawal, Hamas made an announcement that it is sending out its armed police force to regain control of the areas that Israel has withdrawn from, to instill law and order, and not only is it doing it on the ground, but publicly said in order to hunt down those suspected of collaboration with Israel. Since then, it has been reported in the BBC that Hamas deployed over 7,000 armed troops throughout the Gaza Strip, again, in the areas that the Israeli military has withdrawn from. And we have seen a lot of internal fighting. We've seen fighting between the different factions in Gaza that had been fighting Hamas, some of them openly allied with Israel against Hamas throughout the war, some of them not allied with Israel, but simply saw it as an opportunity to start actually fighting Hamas. And now we're seeing a return to fighting within the Palestinians themselves. And we're seeing a lot of public executions that Hamas is carrying out, with regards to people it suspects of collaboration. So we have Hamas's police on the ground in Gaza. There's also a report that Hamas has appointed 5 new governors to administer the different parts of the Gaza Strip. So a lot of Hamas's political leadership was killed in the war, but Hamas has appointed new governors to administer these different regions. And it was reported yesterday that Hamas has announced to merchants in Gaza that it is starting up again its tax collection methods, that is going to collect taxes from the big merchants that are importing goods and selling goods in the Gaza Strip. All this to say that while Trump is announcing that the war is over, and while there are all these announcements about the future Hamas disarming, Hamas not going to be part of the government, after 2 years of fighting, tens of thousands of people killed, Hamas right now is in full swing of regaining control in the Gaza Strip. It is appointing governors, a political side, developing its tax collecting mechanism, economic sides, also reestablishing security control, military sides. All those things are happening currently in the Gaza Strip, which takes me back a little bit to what I was saying before when someone asked about Netanyahu's future. Netanyahu is going to have a difficult time selling that this was total victory and that Hamas is defeated. There's no doubt that Hamas has been beaten back and that thousands of Hamas fighters have been killed. At the same time, 2 years of fighting, Israel's mighty military, that boasts about being the strongest military in the Middle East, after the moment that the truce was declared, Hamas has managed to deploy 7,000 armed troops. So they still have arms, still have weaponry, armed troops, and is reestablishing its political mechanisms on the ground. Israel has said that as far as it's concerned, the war is not over, that the war will be over only with the achievement of its goals that include Hamas disarmament and a complete demilitarization. Hamas has said that it is willing to negotiate. Hamas has said different things. Some of its leaders have said it's not willing to even discuss the possibility of disarming. Others have said it's willing to discuss disarming, but only with regards to giving its weaponry to a Palestinian actor if there's a Palestinian state, if there is a Palestinian leadership that is appointed by the Arab League, only to them are they willing to surrender their weaponry. So Hamas has said different things about that. And similarly, when it comes to demilitarization, when it comes to what's going to be the future governing of the Gaza Strip, Hamas has said that it is willing to not take part in the future government of Gaza. At the same time, however, Hamas has also said, it issued a public statement, a joint statement with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the 3 biggest factions in Gaza, that has said at the same time, while Hamas is willing to give up power, it categorically rejects the idea of an international sovereign coming into the Gaza Strip. So, Trump's plan calls for the establishment of what's called the Board of Peace. Trump is going to lead it. Tony Blair is going to be part of it. The establishment of this international transitory force, and also a Palestinian technocratic government. And Hamas has said, disarming, yes, no. But when it comes to governance, it's willing to not be in charge, but it's not willing to recognize that a foreign sovereign, a non-Palestinian sovereign, has any control in the Gaza Strip. So that's why I said it's critically important to not just look at the peace conference and the fact that international actors and guarantors are saying that the war is over. We need to look at what's happening on the ground. On the ground, Israel controls 58% of the Gaza Strip. In the other parts of the Gaza Strip, the remaining 48%, Hamas is regaining control. It's redeploying its police officers. It is redeploying its people on the ground to start hunting down who it considers collaborators. It's reestablishing its political control. Israel is saying the war is not over until its goals are achieved. Hamas is saying it's willing to possibly discuss disarming, possibly not, but it's not willing to accept the idea of the international sovereignty in the Gaza Strip. So on the ground, the sides are saying very different things compared to what the international forces are declaring in Sharm el-Sheikh. Does that mean that the peace conference has no chance, or Trump's plan has no chance? No, it does not mean that. Once again, if we look 2 weeks ago, Israel and Hamas were both saying that they're not going to get to where they are now. And in the end, the United States pretty much compelled Israel to do that. And Hamas was pretty much compelled by Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt to live up to its part. So the fact that the sides are rejecting, essentially, large parts of what the peace conference is saying is going to happen doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It does mean it's not going to be a smooth road. It's not that from now on there is peace in the Middle East and the sides have agreed to love each other. Instead, what we have is international actors negotiating amongst themselves what should be. All of these international actors have monumental sway over the fighting sides, over Israel and Hamas. So very possibly, if they manage to negotiate successfully, we will see this implemented through that international pressure. But at this point, the sides themselves are not actually the ones that are talking about how this is going to be implemented. So that's what I wanted to say with regards to the on the ground, what's happening versus the international conference. I'm now going to again pause and take a look at some of the questions. So Hammer122, I hope that this answers a little bit the question of, in my opinion, after today, is there a chance for true peace? Like I said, we can't see the future in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One of the things that I often tell people, and I think some of you have heard me say this in some of the lives I've done already. On October 8th, 2023, I did several interviews, and I was asked, like, where does the two-state solution stand? And I said, listen, on the one hand, it seems as far from ever. It seems completely impossible. The sides that were just gearing up for the war. And none of us could have imagined that it would be this rough, but we're gearing up for the war. So at the same time, in 1993, when the sides shake hands, Arafat and Rabin shake hands in the Oslo Accords, if you look back 2 years before that, the sides seem furthest from that than could have ever been. Arafat was then allied with Saddam Hussein. We had the first Gulf War. The international Arab actors were attacking Iraq. The PLO was being thrown out of different countries. Israel, in turn, was facing the Palestinian Intifada and was employing massive repression on the ground. No one would have predicted that within 2 years, the sides would be shaking hands. Similarly, in 2003, the height of the second Intifada, buses blowing up and hotels blowing up in Israel, Israel carrying out massive violent operations in the West Bank primarily. Ariel Sharon is just elected to be prime minister. No one would have predicted that within 2 years we'll have the official declaration of the end of the Intifada and Israel pulling out of the Gaza Strip. So, does it look like there's going to be peace between Israel and Palestinians, that Hamas is going to disarm, there's going to be some sort of more positive future in Gaza? It's hard to see that pathway. At the same time, because it's hard to see, I don't say it's impossible. I don't say that it's not going to happen, because generally there's massive changes in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, unfortunately, whenever there's a big spiral of violence. The last 2 years have been the biggest spiral of violence that existed. So very likely we are going to see some sort of change with regards to that. I'm going to quickly look through some of the other questions. What are the implications towards professional State Department for the apparent success of the negotiations? So the negotiations are being led primarily not by the U.S. State Department. They're being led primarily by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. I'm sorry, I'm actually in a moment of being of full disclosure personally. I am being told that one of my kids, like I said, I have 2 kids under 3. One of them is 3, one of them is 10 months old. I'm being told that one of them has woken up, so I'm probably going to have to end this soon. Again, apologies, trying to be full disclosure. The negotiations are being led by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Remains to be seen if actually the State Department can get more involved with regards to the different states that are operating, that are involved, because the United States is trying to bring in Indonesia, trying to bring in Pakistan. It's trying to bring in, thank you, sorry, so professors juniors, indeed, is trying to bring in other countries. So maybe the State Department will get more involved, but at this point, it's a little bit hard to see. Okay, so I plan to be on for another 10 minutes, but like I said, full disclosure, I'm now very distracted by the fact that my kids are waking up and it is just 9 p.m. here. It's not even well into the night. So with that, I'm probably going to end this live session. If this is your first time catching my channel, just a few words. My name is Alon Burstein. I'm a professor of political science and Israel Institute Fellow at Tufts University. What I run is the Israel-Palestine Report, where I try to upload at least once a week, but usually more than that, different updates on what is happening in the war, trying to look at it from all sides. Typically, I do this in a very as non-biased as I can with regards to these reports ends up usually annoying people from both sides, because I try to present things in a very neutral manner. But feel free to subscribe, and if you have any other questions, feel free to write them in right now. I will really try to answer them quickly. Why do we need the presence of all state leaders for this deal? Mostly it's a show of force. It's a show of support. It's a show that everyone is on board, and therefore the sides should not walk away from it. That's usually when you have many leaders participating in these events. It's a way to try to show everyone's on board, and it's in your interest to try to actually go forward with whatever the sides are trying to negotiate. Okay. With that, thank you everyone for joining, and I will probably upload another summary or event later in the week, and if not, possibly on the weekend. Thank you. Monumental day, regardless of what happens in the Israel-Hamas war, and have a good night or a good day, depending on where you are.